The Phoenix Lights, Stephenville, and Kecksburg are only a few events that have gained national attention. But how many encounters with extraterrestrials have there been? Are these the only ones? Or have our skies been filled with these otherworldly crafts? Hi, I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and this is Just Energy. Today we'll be speaking with Tom Conwell, the author of the book, They Are Here, Volume 2. Tom has tirelessly gone through hundreds of reported sightings and case studies and has documented the kind and frequency of these encounters. In his first book, They Are Here, Volume 1, he shares his findings about UFOs over the eastern seaboard. Today, he will reveal what he has uncovered in the countless reports of sightings of UFOs over the Midwest. What he's uncovered is shocking. Tom, it is just so great to have you back on the show to talk about your new book, They Are Here, and I'm just saying Volume 2 to save words.
Okay.
But in your first book, They Are Here, East Coast UFOs, Volume 1, you covered sightings on the eastern seaboard. So what areas are you covering in this new edition of They Are Here?
Okay. Well, the areas involve the state of Ohio, and then it moves west and north and south from pretty much there, Ohio to Indiana to Illinois, and then south towards Missouri, Iowa, Missouri, and Arkansas. Now, I included Louisiana only because it was on the Gulf of Mexico in Volume 1. And then over to Texas and straight north to all the states all the way up through North Dakota, and then back east to Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So that's pretty much the loop.
Okay. So, my mind is going, okay, visualize a map of the United States, North
right.
Dakota, Nebraska, but isn't that, anyway. And so I'm going to assume that like Colorado, New Mexico, and those states will be in a later volume.
Yep, that's Volume 3, West Coast.
Okay. Because I'm sure the listeners or viewers are going to be really interested in that volume, with all the talk about like Dulce, New Mexico, and Mount Shasta and that kind of stuff. But we're going to talk today about the Midwest. And so before we get into the details of what is in this edition, you were on the show not that long ago. You put this book out pretty quick, talking about, the sightings on the East Coast. But briefly, for the viewers, can you describe to them what you were looking for and how you organized your data?
Okay, well, as far as the data goes, the data and what I was looking for, that's two totally separate subjects, and I'll explain that in a minute. The data was done in pretty much the same way. I broke down each of the databases into 7 different sighting types for each state, and then I put them in in a graph that would pretty much cover the entire time that the database was existing, from mostly 1950 right through to the present. In addition to that, I broke the time down into 4 separate spots with the same amount of sightings in each time group. What I noticed was in the early years, there were, of course, a whole lot fewer reported sightings, and the first group of sightings goes from about 1950 through and including almost 2001. That's the first group. That's broken down into 4s, okay? And then the second fourth was 2002 on, and you can pretty much tell that they're going to compress from there on, and right up to 2013 through 15, which is the 4th group. And then I displayed all of the results for the type of sightings and let me go over the sighting types that I had. First of all, I had cigar shapes And pretty much cigar shapes were just pretty much that. They were rectangular, cylindrical, and almost pretty much looked like cigars. Then there were discs. Well, that's the typical flying saucer, okay? And anything that looks sort of like that, that's what was called a disc. Fireballs. This is where things start to get a little sticky. A lot of people refer to fireballs as meteors, okay? And I had to draw a distinction. Any fireball seen in the sky that was seen for longer than 1 minute, I called a fireball. Anything that was seen less than a minute, I totally discounted. I just threw it out. And the reason I did that is because I just wasn't sure if the person who made the reporting was aware of the time passage. Because you get, when you see something in the sky, you get excited and time sort of slips away from you. You don't really understand how long it was that you saw it. So I cut it off at about a minute, and everything longer than that I used. And a fireball is just that. Looks like a ball of fire in the sky that moves slowly. Many times it almost stopped, okay? Lights. Lights are just points of lights in the sky. They can be just about anything that's unidentified. And a lot of times these are the most misidentified things seen in the sky. And also, you're also going to find in all of the graphs that these are the largest amount of sightings. Sightings seen from a distance that may or may not be flying objects that are unidentified, okay? Then there were shapes. Now, shapes are really weird. The shapes could be either a diamond. It looks just like a diamond in the sky. A cross, I mean, literally a cross. And another time, rectangular shaped objects. And these are the ones I think are probably the most interesting, because these things look like flying shoeboxes. If you can even imagine that. I mean, how something like that would stay up in the air, I have no idea. But just like a flying shoebox, and some of these have large appendages off the side, almost as if you were to put two shoeboxes together in an L shape, then that's what it would look like. Very weird, very odd, okay? And a lot of times these are absolutely humongous. Just, and they fly right over the treetops. Absolutely crazy. You know darn well you're not seeing a jumbo jet. I mean, there's just no doubt there. Then we have spheres. And spheres can be anything from a tiny orb to, well, something as large as the moon. It looks just like a round object in the sky. Many times these spheres are seen, especially back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, these things were seen most often outside of windows in skyscrapers, looking in. Yeah, a lot of sightings like that.
That's
what
weird.
in the world? Yeah, really, what's going on? And people have seen them outside, and they'll look up and happen to see something with a glint of light that is sitting right next to a window, and then drop down one level, one floor, and hang out there, or drop down 3 floors and hang out there. What the heck are they doing? Very odd, very odd. And then there's triangles, and we all know what a triangular craft is. It looks just like that, just looks like a triangle. A lot of times you just see lights in a triangular shape. And a lot of times I have to go into the actual description of what the craft happened to be and edit their determination of a triangle out and call it either lights or spheres, because there just may be 3 lights in a triangular shape. That's not a triangular craft. Okay, so those are the 7 different variations, and I did that for every state within central United States, just like I did with every state in the eastern United States. And what happens then is, now that I'm using the same yardstick, it's reasonably realistic to say you can compare one to the other. Okay, because you're using the same yardstick. Okay?
Well, and I think that makes good scientific inquiry to use the same criteria from one to the other, because then you're now comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and not stuff to oranges. So I mean
Yeah.
that's just smart.
Sure. What the other thing I had to do was I had to keep switching around, jumping around different states. I'd take a state and do it for maybe about 2 or 3 years, and then get out of that state completely, not work to the end, because I didn't want to try to bias myself. Let's say that I had seen a whole lot of, let's say, fireballs in the sky in one state. I didn't want to start identifying things as fireballs to match my data. So I had to jump around to almost confuse myself, so that I wouldn't make assumptions. Okay.
Well, and on that point, one of the things that I was wondering, we have these reported sightings, and so are we talking about multiple people having sightings of a singular event? So, I'm thinking like the Phoenix Lights, where there were hundreds of people that saw that event. So would that be considered one sighting, even though it was by a number of people? Or are we talking about different sightings, different days as an event?
Okay. The other thing that I did is I looked at the date for every single sighting. If there happened to be a sighting in the same city around the same time, like within 5 minutes of each other, I called that one sighting, not two. If they were in separate cities around the same time, depending on how close to the time that they were reported to be, I may or may not have deleted them. What I really wanted to do was try to see if there was a passage from point A to point B of a craft that's seen in the air, or if just a whole lot of people saw it at the same time and they identified their town differently, even though they live next door to each other. So I had to do a judgment call on each one of those. Some I deleted and only made one, and others I included if I thought the city was a little different from the original.
You mentioned the passage, and I think that that's some excellent data where if you have, using New York, for example, if you have a sighting in Buffalo and then 10 minutes later you have a sighting in Utica or Ithaca or some other city, which would indicate that there was actually something moving through the sky that multiple people were seeing. Did you find that very often? Did that kind of pop out at you?
No, because what I found that when people would describe things, even though they may have happened to see the same thing, they described it differently. So I couldn't be sure if they were seeing the same thing. If they were real close to each other, then you can make an assumption maybe they saw the same thing. Now, I didn't see a lot of those. And I saw fewer of those actually in the central U.S. than I did in the eastern U.S., only because I started to jump around in the states, just so that I wasn't going to mess up my data. I just wanted to make sure that I was doing everything correctly, and so. Did I see a few? There was a few, especially in southern Ohio, in Illinois, northern Illinois. I saw a few in Missouri, and a bunch in Oklahoma. And those are the only ones that I can recall that I saw that looked like a sequence. But then again, I couldn't have been certain because they describe things differently.
But even having, a few in different locations is more than it's this really giant anomaly that's happening. So if you ended up in your Midwestern search with 25 and we reduce that by a quarter, we're still talking a significant number, and that there is something, in my opinion, going on, or something to look at. It's not just a very random, weird thing.
Right. Yeah. I did not see. Well, actually, I shouldn't say this. Um, Let me rephrase it. That if I happen to come across a sequence of events describing something very similar in a very short time frame, um, uh, I utilize pins on a map to do that. Well, it just so happens that there were so many pins on the map that it became impossible to determine um, uh, sequences. So I had to pretty much go by memory. After I started putting the pins on the map, I realized, oh my, I'm not going to be able to tell what kind of sequences have happened. All right. So even though it was nice to know information that there were sequences, I'm not so sure that was really what I was interested in so much. I think I knew sequences existed, and people definitely did say that they saw it coming to them from a great distance over near such and such town, and you happen to go over to that town and you see a sighting. That's interesting, but I don't find that data that important to me. What I'm looking for is quantity, and I'm looking for quantity so that I can say to myself, there's so many things being seen in the sky here and everywhere that you can't discount this anymore. That's my main thrust. There's just so many, you can't say no. You just can't.
Well, and it might not be important to your research, which I totally get. You got your plate full just looking at the quantity and disbursement. But I think it's good information to put out to someone else that is interested in UFOs, or an aspiring UFO researcher, that, this is a piece of data that is potentially out there, that they can take that mantle on their shoulders to start looking for these patterns through the data set. Just saying.
There's so many reports. Say, for instance, let me throw out a state. Ohio had about 4,200 sightings in it. Whoa.
So, and is that like from the 50s or whatever?
Yes, yeah. The number is just so huge that it's so hard to look at the date and I'm trying to identify the type of thing seen, and not so much when it was seen. I suppose I could go back through the data and look for large amounts of events within a short period of time. Like I said, I mentioned the states that I saw them in, and they were mostly from 2008 to the present. So you don't really have to go back too far in the data to find that. And perhaps I should do that.
Well, it could be book number 4 or 5 or 6, once you get done with the U.S.
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is killing me, let me tell you. And what's really killing me is when the editor gets a hold of me. You write some, oh, this is great. The editor said, oh, I don't think so. So, yeah, that's a real...
it's the writing blues. Yeah, yes. I'm hearing you. But you mentioned Ohio, and... one of the things that comes to my mind is, in that area, in the Ohio Valley, that is where we have the mound people, starting in the Ohio Valley, Serpent Mound, and then kind of coming down the Mississippi, where some of the more southern mounds are actually not that far from where I live here in Texas, and there's this band that goes up the country. And so do you think that there is a correlation between these sightings and perhaps some of the indigenous people that lived in the United States?
Whoa. Yeah. I think there is. Um, when I went to look at different things in this particular volume than I did in volume one, um, I had to I had to consider Native Americans and their lives and their histories, and also at the same time, mounds became important. Now, I did notice a band of mounds that went from southern Ohio that followed the Ohio River and then straight down the Mississippi River. Saw a lot of that in areas where there weren't too many rivers to follow alongside, like Oklahoma, where there's fewer rivers and a lot of land. These were like stuck out in the middle of fields, and it was kind of hard to put a handle on why they may have been there or whatever else. Um, Now, as far as the mounds go, I did not find a cluster of sightings, and this is only what I had to look with, okay? A cluster of sightings and the mounds. I saw no correlation there, okay? However, I did notice, of course, like I just mentioned, that the mounds were gathered alongside rivers, well, not alongside, but near rivers, usually up in the hills alongside of it, and that go along the Ohio River and the Mississippi River south, and then from where the Ohio comes in, the Mississippi and Missouri north, into the plain states. So yeah, there's a whole lot there.
And, this is something that you and I have talked about offline, but I'm going to give it to you to talk about. What about the Native American cosmology? I mean, do you find stories of, what you would consider extraterrestrial crafts or sightings or aliens in Native American mythology and as part of their cultural base?
Okay. Now, any of the ones that I did in the central U.S., I did not find a lot of petroglyphs, which is the only record that I would have seen, because a lot of the Native Americans did not have a written language. They just had pictures. And I did not find much evidence of what I would consider something odd, okay? But there were some. There was one in Oklahoma, horned spirit. Not sure what that was. Uktina, I believe, was the name of it. I don't know if that was related to an extraterrestrial, but I just found it interesting. And then in Oklahoma, there was a petroglyph of a looked like a gray alien. Looked exactly like a gray alien.
That's Tom Conwell. His webpage is theyarehere-conwell.com. His book, They Are Here, Volume 2. And thanks for watching this portion of our interview with Tom. If you're enjoying today's program, please click on the button below and subscribe to our channel. If you want to hear this interview in its entirety, become a Just Energy Radio insider at justenergyradio.com and access full shows commercial-free and gain access to our over 9 years of show archives. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy.